Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan, MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof, a little bit later than normal for the 23rd of December 2024. Merry Christmas everybody. I'm full of Christmas cheer, or at least I'm full of Christmas beer from last night, and some wine, and then some port. So, I know I shouldn't, but, Christmas drinks with some friends down a pub, and we, just in case you were wondering, we did solve 43% of the world's problems. So that's lucky. We're just going to work on the rest in the new year. But that's not bad for a night at the pub. Okay. Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. Of course, you can find those caveats in the description below. Thank you very much to whomsoever put them together for me. It's at Davin. We have the, I think, fourth largest, or maybe even third or fourth largest personnel loss since the beginning of the war, 1,990. The average is looking on being pretty terrible for the Russians, in that I think December, if it keeps going like this, will be the worst month of the year, worse than November, which was record-breaking. So 1,990 is a significant loss for the Russians there. 6 tanks is... there or thereabouts for this part of the war. I think just a snip below the daily average. Not too bad there. 15 armoured personnel vehicles likewise. 29 artillery systems above the daily average there. Pretty useful. And 67 vehicles and fuel tanks is a fairly hefty loss. 2 pieces of special equipment. Now, Andrew Perpetua's loss list for yesterday shows 139 personnel that he visually saw perish in those videos, which is pretty pretty shocking thing to be doing with your day. And we see actually pretty much a 1-to-1 loss ratio in terms of both combat asset losses and overall losses, with the Russians actually losing, a couple more combat assets lost by the Ukrainians and the Russians here, with the Russians making up in terms of ATVs and civilian vehicles and trucks there. But we'll look at the Ukrainian losses first, and we can see that there are a couple of Leopard 105s on the list damaged, and a command and control vehicle, M577, hitting a mine probably up in the Kursk region. That AFVs, 4 of those damaged, unknown type of AFVs. A couple of M113s damaged and abandoned. So actually the proportion of destroyed against damage is fairly good for the combat asset losses for the Ukrainians here. We've got 3 MRAPs, all of those though destroyed or abandoned, a couple of Senators and a Kozak 7, and then another infantry mobility vehicle, who knows what it was, and some civilian vehicles, an ATV and a single truck. So nothing too bad for the Ukrainians, but 2 damaged Leopard 105s worth noting. We come on to the Russian losses. Not really too bothered about the UGV. I think we see quite a few of those. They're not as valuable as a piece of artillery, but interesting for those who keep tabs on them. 3 artillery systems, a Tornado G. We've got a BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket system as well damaged, but a destroyed Tornado G. So that's good news for the Ukrainians there. Just a couple of tanks and a couple of infantry fighting vehicles and an APC and an MRAP, all destroyed or abandoned. So irretrievable losses there, looking pretty good percentage-wise, but there aren't that many. Quiet day for Andrew and his team there, it seems. Trucks, a few of those, quite a lot of ATVs, and that tells you, I think it paints its own picture there. We've got 4 golf buggies and 4 ATVs being, one of them being tickled there with a fiber optic drone, which means a glancing blow or something. But most of those destroyed. That, I think, indicates the amount that the Russians are using these in their forward positions, in attacks, in maneuvers, civilian vehicles as well, and quite a lot of those on the list. So when we look at combat asset losses, looking at these colours, you're thinking, okay, the Russians have lost fewer than the Ukrainians, but the Russians have probably been using, as I keep saying, a whole bunch of these for combat duties, and therefore we should, I guess, really include many of these in the combat assets for their losses. Okay, A lot of ink being spilled at the moment about an Australian who's been captured. It appears under duress in I think violent interrogation, but on camera now he has his name is Oscar. I forget his name, but anyway, he is self-identified. So the Russians have captured him. I've long said that you really want foreign fighters because they need boots on the ground, the Ukrainians. But the problem is for the Ukrainians, these fighters, if they're captured, then become prizes for the Russians and worth a lot more than Ukrainian soldiers. Just in terms of diplomacy and negotiations, they can get much more out of a negotiation, the Russians, with an Australian or a Brit or an American than they can with a single Ukrainian. So I'm not talking about intrinsic value, I'm talking about extrinsic value here for foreign soldiers. That then presents more of a challenge for the Ukrainians if these guys get captured. Maybe they should be thinking about roles for these people behind the line more so than on the contact in the contact zone. As always, so he self-identifies in a video published by Z channels during which he is hit. So it's illegal to show those sort of videos, although I think most people seem to ignore those. But he's been captured, and that could be a bit of a challenge for the Ukrainians. Right, lots of video footage coming out at the moment. The usual ones to do with that one that I showed you yesterday, still doing the rounds of the column being taken out by the Ukrainians, which was entirely made of civilian vehicles and unarmored vehicles and whatnot. You can see that whole maneuver going on there. Then near Crimea in the Serebyansky forest, there is the Phoenix unit, the DPSU Revenge Brigade, lives up to its name. Destroys one self-propelled gun, one tank, 12 vehicles, one MTLB, 2 fuel depots, dozens of shelters and Russian infantry. So these montage videos doing the rounds with lots of things getting destroyed. There's one, I don't think I've got it here, but there's another one of many more North Korean soldiers getting taken out by drones and whatnot. So all the usual activities still taking place. Now, I didn't know quite where to put this. I'm not exactly sure what happened here. I think it's probably sabotage. It's not a drone strike, but an explosion's been reported in the former Abakan experimental mechanical plant in Russia's Khakassia. Preliminary reports indicate that 2 people were killed and 4 injured, according to local media sources. Tim White then says, Russia's just announced 2 people have died and 4 injured in an explosion at a factory in Abakan. Deputy head of Khakassia, Yuri Kulaev, at the site said a tank exploded during pressure testing. Who knows? But there's an explosion at it appears at some kind of production or repair facility in Russia. Okay, moving on to distant strikes. So we have it was a very heavy start to the night for Ukraine's air defenders, says Tim White, but ended more tamely than in previous days. A relatively low number of 72 attack drones were fired by Russia. I mean, that's say relatively low. That's a pretty sizable wave. With all of them being stopped, 47 were shot down, 25 dummies or stopped by electronic warfare. And indeed, a number of them were also sent or either sent back into Russia, but Belarus, either sent into there or flew into there. As you can see from this infographic, at least 14 Shahids entered Belarus overnight, according to Belaruski Gayun. Aviation of the Belarusian Air Force took off and flew from 7:20 to 8:20. So the Belarusians actively in the air, seeing what those drones were all about. I don't know if they took any of them out. I have seen a fairly sizable explosion taking place in the Rostov region. This was reported by Anton Gerashchenko last night, or yesterday afternoon, really, but that would have been like 7:30. So I don't know if this was yesterday evening or taken from the night before. He says last night from yesterday, so it's probably the night before. Russian ammunitions warehouse in Novocherkassk in Rostov region was hit, according to Russian media. Nice fireworks, really sizable explosion at an ammo depot. So likely 2 nights ago. Now we're going to actually go to. It doesn't seem like the Ukrainians did an awful lot overnight, or at least not that we know of. I do wonder how much is taking place under the radar. In terms of a couple of places that have been previously hit that we know about, just some ramifications. So the Russians, I already reported the Russians have shut down the Novoshakhtinsk oil refinery in Rostov region that was hit. This is quite a major one. They shut down one of the largest refineries after a recent attack by SBU drones and Navy missiles, says PS01. So a bit more detail on this. Shut it down after both primary oil processing units had completely stopped. This was helped by a joint operation by the SBU and the Navy of the Armed Forces of Ukraine that took place last Thursday. Then the SBU drones first overwhelmed the Russian air defense system that was protecting the plant, and then Ukrainian jet missiles came into action, which, together with the drones, created a powerful cotton bomb at the refinery. Cotton is where they talk about, big clouds, like big explosions. The plant processed almost 15,000 tons of oil daily into diesel fuel and jet fuel for enemy military equipment, tanks, armored vehicles, and aircraft. So it's a really significant strike. To have this place shut down will have an effect. So that is very important. Now, the other one that seems to be exceptionally important because the Russians have yet again said they will get revenge for the Ukrainians for doing this. When the Ukrainians hit a significant target, because the Russians come out and say there will be swift revenge for this, which is just accepting that the Ukrainians have done a really good job of taking something out. Now, this particular one is in the Oriol region. So today's attack on a no-name oil depot in the Oriol region is actually very complicated. This is a Google Translate of a source that Max24 has access to. The fact is that Steel Horse is actually a measuring station for the Druzhba oil pipeline, through which oil is supplied to Belarus for processing, as well as for export for Europe. If the equipment, primarily the pump, is out of order, the shutdown may be quite long, and this will affect both Belarusians and European exports. People who choose targets for strikes do not do so at all chaotically, in other words, randomly, but with a full understanding of the importance of this or that object. So the point is that the Ukrainians are picking and choosing their targets for strategic reasons, and this is one. The Oriol is one that may well have exceptionally high importance to the Russians as a result of it being incredibly important for oil exports and refining in Belarus. Indeed, the Metro newspaper in the UK reports Putin vows revenge after Russian oil field is blown up in a massive drone strike. So Putin has promised further destruction of Ukraine after a Russian oil field was destroyed by a massive drone strike overnight. Video footage of the strike shows the oil field erupting in an enormous explosion after the drone attack, lighting up the sky with apocalyptic yellow and orange as Russian air defences seek to defend the strategic depot. The Steel Horse facility supplies Putin's armed forces in Ukraine and links to the Druzhba pipeline, which sends Russian oil to Europe. It was reported ablaze after a concerted attack, with Russia claiming to have shot down 20 drones over the Oriol region, where the depot is located. The giant oil depot has been targeted at least 3 times previously, including a successful strike 1 week ago, which saw a fire burn for several days. Separate Ukrainian strikes recently have homed in on supply bases for the Druzhba pipeline, which is key to oil supplies for Hungary and Slovakia, both of which have opposed military aid and NATO membership for Ukraine. So this could also be an attempt to, Robert Fico's been in Moscow meeting Putin to try and sort out oil and gas supply. They've also been getting in a wrangle with Ukraine. Well, if Ukraine just blows up the ability to use these pipelines, at least the Druzhba oil pipeline, then it kind of shuts down the conversation. Well, we can't negotiate it now because, oh dear, that place is blown up and you can't get oil anyway. Even if we extended the contract for transit through Ukraine, I'm sorry, but we've blown up this particular facility that supplies the oil pipeline. So, oh well. It could be the approach of the Ukrainians. So the governor of Oriol region last night spoke of a massive enemy UAV attack, urging people to please remain calm. What else is worthy of note? I don't know if there's anything else that we need to add to that. So they are going for these, very strategic targets. Russia's refinery, says Sarin, lost 41.1 million tons, or 13% of capacity, due to downtime caused by drone strikes. Now, there's no time put on that. It's a bit of a random, unverifiable claim there. But point for me is that again, like we heard previously, when the Ukrainians were purposely targeting refineries, and it hit the Russians to somewhere, I think 13% was one of the numbers previously mentioned, 17%. These numbers around there, the amount of capacity had been cut for the Russians was, I think, important. The Russians rely on hydrocarbons for an awful lot of export and for money to continue to prosecute the war. So this is incredibly important for Ukraine to try and hit. Okay. Then there was also this talk about, so I talked in the last 2 days, that Kazan skyscraper building, residential building that had 2 drones that went into it. And I was saying, this is 1,000 kilometers from the front line. These are 2 drones slamming into a building in the middle of nowhere, a tall building. That's an elite residential building. Either they were trying to pinpoint, take out that particular either floor, but even more so that apartment in there or whatever, those rooms, because someone important was living there. And there were theories that it could have been the Alabuga drone, thank you very much, Ivan, the Alabuga drone manufacturing facility, and the person that ran that, the CEO of that, awesome to get a cup of tea, I need that cup of tea, and it could be a targeted hit on someone, or they didn't realize a building had been, because it's a relatively new looking building and it's kind of not surrounded by other high buildings. So it could have been on the trajectory of these drones that were trying to hit the Alabuga facility somewhere nearby in this Kazan, in Tatarstan region. I think it is. And that skyscraper was built, and that's why you've got 2 drones were sent from exactly the same position. Point in Ukraine on this route, and they just didn't realize that there's a new building in a way, and so these 2 drones slammed into exactly the same place, trying to actually get to a point behind it, which I think is probably more likely. Now we're starting to hear, sorry, I'm telling you the same thing because it's important to understand this, that the Alabuga economic zone was targeted. So that is that drone facility. Now, there's been much speculation about the attack on Kazan, says Tim White. Russia says drones hitting tower blocks was a civilian attack, though no one was hurt. And they're obviously going to play that off as that narrative. But like I told you, the Ukrainians have few drones, right? They have scarce resources. They're not going to waste drones on trying to hit a civilian infrastructure point 1,000 kilometers from the front line when they could do that just over the border in Belgorod, right? If they want to destroy civilian tower blocks, you go and whack them into Belgorod city, and it's really easy. Piece of piss. You can do that, no problem. You don't waste your time targeting somewhere 1,000 kilometers from the front line. So 100%, this was not an attack on civilian infrastructure. Now we hear Ukraine admits it carried out the attack on the Alabuga economic zone, saying it would hit a warehouse of drone parts worth $16 million. So there were other hits around that facility, that block. There were other hits that took place. Now, a warehouse, and it could be that block sat within the economic zone of the Alabuga. These. I'm not saying that all of these facilities around were to do with Shahed drone manufacture, but you get the point. Warehouse with parts for Shaheds worth $16 million was destroyed in Russia, according to GUR. It caught fire in Alabuga. The premises contained 65 fuselages of attack drones, as well as engines, navigation systems, thermal imaging cameras. Everything burned down. And we've actually seen pictures inside either that facility or similar ones. If you remember, I've shown you facilities with these Shahed drones lined up, up and down the facility, and thinking, God, that would be a nice place to hit. And it could well be that has indeed been hit. So 65 drone fuselages, engines, navigation systems, thermal cameras for 400 Shahed 136 units, all incinerated. The warehouse was located in the Alabuga economic zone. So that has happened as well. None of this was last night, but just giving you further context to previous strikes. Okay, now on to other bits and pieces. First of all, worrying news that the Russians could well be starting to push into Zaporizhia and Kherson, or at least have aims to do so. Tim White says, I've been reporting about recent suicidal attempts by Russia in Kherson region to cross to the right bank of the river Dnipro There's now credible intelligence that it's just the start of a big operation, with Moscow waiting for swampy land to freeze before storming with 4,000 troops, says Tim White here. And RBC Ukraine reports on this as well. So Russia's preparing an offensive in Kherson and Zaporizhia. Max 24 says, for quoting RBC Ukraine, the operation will be supervised by the commander of the Russian Airborne Forces, Mikhail Teplinsky. This is someone that we've talked about previously. Teplinsky is brought down to the Dnipro River area to try and, I think he's a VDV commander, to sort things out there. Up to 4,000 Russian soldiers are planned to be involved in the tasks, as mentioned. So, worrying. Okay. And I know the other day I had not quite a disagreement. I don't think so. Georgie from Ukraine Matters was on a live stream with myself and Jonathan Fink, and I've been saying that North Koreans, both personnel and equipment, are potentially a game changer. If and buts and etc., if all these caveats are taken into account, then the North Koreans become a game changer, because they could provide, I'm not talking about infinite numbers of soldiers, but if they're able to provide Russia with 100,000 soldiers and, I don't know, hundreds of pieces of mechanized equipment and ballistic missiles and this and that, then Russia is able to sustain the war for longer and longer. And that changes things. That is a game changer to the point where I think that Russia was on the brink of complete culmination, as in without the North Korean weaponry, and think of all the millions of rounds of artillery ammunition they have already received. If they hadn't received help from North Korea, I think Russia might have been done for. Honestly, like all of those thousands and thousands of cargo, of those containers that Russia has received from North Korea, they hadn't received a single one, Russia would have had no artillery to fire, or relatively little. They would have been expending their production capacity, and they would be in all sorts of trouble. So now South Korean intelligence have warned its communist neighbour, North Korea, is preparing to give Russia even more troops and weapons. It estimates North Korea's dead and wounded to already be over 1,000, and expects kamikaze drones and artillery to be sent to Moscow soon. Okay, so this is an issue. Right, Anton Gerashenko says, North Korea and Russia are deepening their military cooperation, the Wall Street Journal has reported. Andrei Kovalenko, head of Ukraine Center for Counter and Disinformation, says 60% of the artillery and mortar shells used by Russia, so this is right now, come from Pyongyang. So North Korea is providing 60% of artillery and mortar ammunition. Military equipment, including multiple missile systems, is arriving in Russia by rail, and rail transportation across the border has reached a record level. North Korean missiles account for nearly 1/3 of Russian ballistic missiles launched at Ukraine this year, other Ukrainian officials say. Honestly, if this is true, that is the game-changing situation I've been talking about. But it's already happened. The game has changed, and by change, actually the games remain the same. But what I mean is it's changed from what it would have been, which is Russia tailing off their ability to send missiles, tailing off their ability to send artillery rounds into Ukraine at the rate they have been, which is already a decreased rate from a year and a half ago. But the fact that they have kept it at this kind of rate, rather than being forced to fire at this rate, is because North Korea have helped them. It is huge. The artillery shells initially supplied by North Korea were a decade old. This raised suspicions that Kim's regime was sending old stockpiles, but now Pyongyang is supplying newer ammunition. For example, the 240mm multiple launch missile systems sent to Russia have recently been equipped with new guidance and control systems. According to the US and South Korean officials, Russia's troops are receiving more and more weapons on ships and trains. About 200 munitions factories in North Korea are operating at full capacity, and Russia is sending fuel and equipment to support Pyongyang's weapons production, Seoul officials say. And I wonder if China is helping out North Korea with, I don't know, that's completely my speculation, because there are some who say actually the relationship between North Korea and China is an interesting, complex one, and they're not necessarily fans of the North Koreans doing this in the region. However, you could also present a thesis that China can help Russia through a proxy. Rather than China give military equipment to Russia to use in Ukraine, they could give North Korea the ability to make that, the resources and the tech to make that stuff in North Korea and send it to Ukraine, or to Russia to use in Ukraine. This is massively serious, and I don't think it's being treated seriously enough by the West. North Korea has shipped some 20,000 containers of munitions to Russia, ranging from 5 million 122mm and 125mm artillery shells to more than 100 Hwasong-11 class ballistic missiles, says the Wall Street Journal. More recently, Pyongyang has sent 170mm self-propelled howitzers and 240mm long-range multiple rocket launchers. Around 200 munitions factories in North Korea are operating at full capacity to produce weapons. This is a worry. Let me know what you think about this. Are you as worried as I am? It's just like the Ukrainians have to attrit all of this now. All of these people and all of this materiel that North Korea is sending, not only do these missiles and artillery shells fly into Ukraine to kill Ukrainians, both civilians and soldiers, but the Ukrainian soldiers have to attrit all of this equipment, waste time and resources and human beings in attritting this. This will cost Ukraine over time an awful lot. You can dismiss the North Koreans as not their equipment not being as good as XYZ, or their troops not being as good as XYZ, but these are challenges for the Ukrainians, without doubt. Now, back to the sad state of affairs with the oil in the Azov Sea and surrounding areas. Unfortunately, we're seeing dolphins wash up on the shores there. 6 dead dolphins are found washed up on the shores of Novorossiysk. According to Russian Telegram channels, the likely cause is a Volga-neft fuel oil spill, which poses a serious threat to marine life in the region. The Black Sea is home to 3 species of sea mammals, the bottlenose dolphin, common dolphin, and harbour porpoise, all of which are classified as endangered. Meanwhile, in Russian-occupied Kerch, the clean-up efforts for the Mazut spill are reportedly being carried out solely by volunteers. Despite the spill reaching the Crimean coast yesterday, local occupation authorities and emergency services have yet to respond to the environmental disaster. So while people are helping out, it appears that they are just volunteers. The Russian state couldn't give a damn. Now, unfortunately, all of those bags that they have collected up of the Mazut oil have now been washed back into the sea, or at least many of them. Bags with Mazut fuel that were collected at the Black Sea beaches are being washed into the sea again. Russian Telegram channels report all the cleaning has been stopped due to a storm. So more Mazut can be dumped onto the shore from the sea. The environmental disaster continues. So they've cleaned a lot of this, some of it up, and then the storms come along and they haven't got rid of those bags from the beach, and they come and wash those oily bags back out to sea. It's just one disaster after another. Heartbreaking stuff, really. And finally, a cargo vessel that has been sent to transport Russian military equipment from Syria has broken down in the open sea, according to Ukraine's intelligence. The cargo vessel Sparta, sent to Syria to bring out Russian military equipment, broke down in the open sea and now drifts near the shore of Portugal, Ukraine's HUR has claimed. I suppose that's good news for the Ukrainians in terms of the Russian inability to move that military equipment from Syria to wherever they're going to move it. There are some claims that it's going to Libya. One was worrying previously that a lot of their equipment would be sent to Ukraine, with troops and materiel being thrown into the war in Ukraine. Okay, that's enough from me. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate your support. Thank you so much for those who are continuing to help out with the trucks under the Christmas tree Car for Ukraine fundraiser. We have raised 36,510 euros so far of the 40,000 goal that we have. It's been absolutely fantastic. I might be getting on, or it might be today actually, the people who are organising this, Claire and Ivan, onto a live chat. At the moment, we're up to a huge 100,000. They were on one the other day with the shills, and they pulled in lots of funding there, which was really fantastic to see. We look at the fundraisers, we've got ATP up there, but also War Translated's Dmitry has now funded 2 trucks worth. Andrew Mikado up to almost 14,600 there. Suchimimus almost reached his total of a truck. Rick the Ukrainian over halfway. Silicon Curtain almost halfway. The Shills on a couple of grand, and the others as well. They're all thereabouts. So, you know, we're all putting it together to get this over the line. At the moment, we are just about 2/3 of the way there, and which is incredibly impressive and well within the time frame they were planning on. But of course, it means that we need to keep up that momentum for the next 10 days or so. Or I think it was due to finish something like the 9th of January, but we are ahead of the game. But you would imagine that these things tail off a little bit, and we need to keep that momentum going. So if anyone has the ability to help out, please do so. And if you don't, please share and ask those others who might well be up for helping to do so. That would be really appreciated. Anyway, take care, guys, and speak to you soon. Tool pips.